podcast. My name's Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
And this week we're doing an episode with just the two old regulars, the old reliable Joel McLeod and old less than reliable Roland Tanner. But we're looking at a story. Actually, something that was a big article in the CBC yesterday about Hamilton Police and their use of drones to monitor a range of things from traffic collisions to public demonstrations, and the kind of lack of information that was publicly available about this, about why they're using drones and the public implications of police services using drones to monitor us as we go about our law-abiding lives. Joel, what was your take on this piece?
My initial assessment is I don't like it, most because there's so little scrutiny around the use of this technology, especially by like local police agencies. This in the article on the CBC, we'll put a link to it in our show notes. But just in Hamilton alone, there's something called a privacy impact assessment, which is what the police have to do to say what the impact, basically what the, I'm going to say, threat to our personal privacy in public would be by the use of these devices. And so they had on the Hamilton Police posted that just in 2022 alone, their drones were used multiple times, including collecting pictures and measurements from car crashes and crime scenes, helping with ground searches, search and rescue, and finding missing people, providing a tactical aerial perspective to monitor protests, mass gathering, riots, barricaded people, hostage situations, and high-risk search warrants, identifying suspects, other uses such as for fires or explosions, flight testing, training, and judicial authorization. This stuff is in my mind too broad to use. Like the things of just going back here, high risk search warrants. What? Too many times we hear stories of police, especially we heard in Peel region of times when police were issuing search warrants from people who are really not. What they needed more was a social worker, somebody in the mental health field, than like a TAC team storming down the breaking down the door to investigate. Just the idea is that this is going to make our lives safer because the police will have this technology, and I would argue, no, it doesn't. This doesn't make our lives easier. The article also posted here the flight logs that for 2022 and January 2023 include numerous car crashes, investigating the scene of a shootout. If everyone remembers the story of the gentleman who shot and killed a man in Milton, got on the 407, drove down to Hamilton, and they ended up with a shootout in a Hamilton cemetery. Big news in the region. Well, apparently a drone was used in that matter to surveil the situation as well. The fake homecoming party for McMaster last year, a drone was used there. The search for a missing 80-year-old Shirley Love, and then most recently, when Trudeau government had their cabinet retreat here in Hamilton, the protests that happened as a result of that, well, drone was used in that. My question is why? Like these cameras record. What happens to this footage afterwards, right? What happens to this footage of somebody attending this protest, which people, as much as you may or may not agree with them, they have a perfectly legal right to do. We have a right to free expression. We have a right to protest our government no matter what. These people are exercising their democratic right. You may not agree with it, but they still had a right to do it. Why are they on camera now with the Hamilton PD? What are they doing with this footage? Is a question that I think, regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, should concern you.
It's traditionally been and preserved the right to be to jump to the defense of people's right to privacy and to law-abiding, within the law, not being snooped on. And I think a protest falls within that remit, certainly. There are, I guess first thing you say is, let's recognize how drones could be useful, and for police forces. And I'm guessing that Hamilton doesn't have a helicopter. I think maybe Toronto does, but Toronto police do, but Hamilton doesn't. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than a helicopter, and police have been using helicopters for decades and decades. So we recognize how these things can have valid uses. Where certainly my sort of hackles rise is when we see them used as surveillance tools on people going about their lawful, law-abiding business, and a protest falls within that remit, certainly, as perfectly law-abiding. And now the police said they used it at a I believe it was a Grey Cup game. It's like, oh yeah, well, it's just for monitoring the traffic and stuff. We're not looking at people. Well, how do we know that? Says who, and says you. The whole issue is how this is being. We have to trust the police that they're using things for the reasons that they say they're using them. And until the CBC started investigating this, there was no notice on the Hamilton Police website that they were using drones at all, which actually contravened their own the PIA, the Privacy Impact Assessment. It said that one of the first things they had to do was get it on the website, and they didn't. And no real explanation for why, where, and when they're going to use this drone.
The one thing that is worrying to me is the use of facial recognition technology, and these are two stories that are kind of starting to come together now. In Hamilton Police defense, they have said that they have not used facial recognition technology. They say this is equivalent to like a security camera to monitor a crowd. So be it, I guess. However, we do know that certain police departments across Canada, and especially in the United States, but we do in Canada, are buying very dangerous facial recognition technology. This is technology that for a while was kind of the no-go zone for a lot of social media companies like Facebook, Google, because they said once the cat's out of the bag on this, it's so dangerous to be able to recognize your face online and then be able to link it to various wherever you might be posted online, even if it's without your consent or awareness that your photo is on the internet. Like if you're in the background of a photo, this technology might be able to identify you. We know that police are experimenting with purchasing or getting access to this because there's no rules or regulations or laws surrounding the use of it from any. It's at least here in Ontario, at least like the provincial government has not laid down that police cannot use this, at least to my knowledge, or no regulations about how, do they need a warrant to use it? Do they need the parameters that they can use it? It's only, to me, it's if we don't, I guess it's the creeping militarization of our police forces that, okay, they're using a drone, it's just used to crowd control. Great, wonderful. How long is it until somebody says, it'd be great if we pay the upgrade? We pay that upgrade bill, we got that technology on there. We could see who's at these crowds. Think about how great would it be if you're in Hamilton PD and say, we can go in that Trudeau protest, fly the camera over top, and you hit your facial recognition software, and you're able to identify people who are coming out, repeat protesters perhaps, or people that you say, well, I want to be able to track and follow them once they leave the protest. Like there's my concern is always, yeah, on the surface this seems like a good idea, but when you start asking like the follow-up questions, you say, well, are we really willing to trust the police with this level of power over us? I, for one, am not, most because I don't think the police have earned the right to do this. This is something that we've come back to. Now, we talked about this before we came on here, is that there's this creeping blind eye to police that, this, we've heard it from right-wing media, not media, well, media, as well as politicians, saying basically selling the idea that chaos and order is just a thin blue line, that if it wasn't for police, we would all be descended into anarchy and chaos, and God forbid anyone who would impact the police ability to save us from the big bad boogeyman who's just around the corner. And I have issues with this narrative. I really do. I think it only serves a select few, and it takes away the power of the police. Ultimately are ours. They don't belong to, they're not their own entity. They're not their own. It's not a regular job. It's a hard job, but it should be hard. And we should make it as hard as possible, because at the end of the day, these people serve us, and we give them a lot of power to potentially infringe on our freedoms. They should be held to the highest of scrutiny and the highest of professional standards at all times in everything that they do.
And they should welcome that.
Yes,
if they're as good as they claim to be, if they're as there shouldn't be pushback when people say there should be increased oversight. There should be, because it's like, to use a police argument often police often use when people sort of resist surveillance or identity cards or things like this. Well, if you're not doing anything wrong, what are you worried about? Well, turn that right back on them. It's like, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, why are you resisting increased oversight from the government, increased questioning of
right.
the resources that are given to you? I mean, again, and I noticed there's a cultural difference in North America to how people relate to first responders of all kinds. And actually that phrase first responders is one that is very North American, in that it, in other parts of the world, they might be called the security services or emergency services or a combination of those. The phrase first responders is one that itself kind of downplays the fact that the police are security. They're protecting the public or whatever, but that they are,
on that note, I do want to say, like, I think when I personally think of first responders, I think of like paramedics or firefighters. When a medical or a crisis, an accident happens, something tragic has happened, a car accident or something is on fire, or you're having a medical emergency, you call a first responder. You're expecting a paramedic or a fire department to show up and help put out the fire, treat the injury, treat the situation. And those people I really have no problem with those individuals. They should be paid well. They should be given the tools that they need, because they are literally racing there first. The difference I have with police is that 9 times out of 10, the police are called in after the accident. The police are actually the last responders to show up. The police, when a crime happens, it happens. The police are kind of called in after the fact to, well, what happened here? How do we piece together the clues and find out what the who did what in the situation? And that's important and it's vital to our society. But I think it comes into this mentality of, like, again, the thin line between chaos and order. If the police aren't there to rush in and stop it, everything will collapse like a deck of cards or a house of cards. Sorry.
Yeah, and we were talking about came online. I think it was a tweet last week from former Conservative candidate in Burlington, Emily Brown, I believe, who was sort of raising the spectre of chaos on the streets of Halton, which is frankly laughable. Halton is one of the safest places in Canada. It's one of the safest places in North America, probably. To live. It has a very well-funded police service that doesn't face some of the challenges that other police services in this part of Ontario face. And I'm not downplaying the seriousness of the things that they have to do whatsoever, but Halton ain't crime central. Come on.
No.
And of course, her narrative is, clearly she's intending to run again whenever the next election comes along. It's to whip up a narrative that the federal government is soft on crime and blah blah blah, and it's like, give me a break. The thing that annoys me be about that is all the little old ladies who are living in Halton, little old ladies and little old gentlemen, I should say, who are generally who believe this garbage, and who live in fear because people are whipping up this idea that they can't go outside their front door without being mugged, which is just nonsense.
Well, it is malarkey. I mean, but Emily, we've asked Emily Brown to come on this podcast many a time. We get into, she'll post something on Twitter, and you or I will respond back saying, well, okay, what about X, Y, or Z? Honest questions. Like, it's not meant to be a gotcha moment, but it's just, she posted something and we say, well, okay, but what happens in this situation then? And she'll come back and discuss, with a retort. I said, well, listen, why don't we have this conversation on our podcast as opposed to doing this on Twitter? Because it seems that you have ideas about this. We have ideas about this. Let's discuss it. And then, of course, she goes silent. And it's a concern to me is that, you're going to drum up the whole, again, we're only a one bad day away from chaos. And it's those blasted liberals in Ottawa who are prohibiting police from doing their work. I could say the police can afford. I'm looking at recent news, like not just in Hamilton, but across the province. We have Halton Police release a podcast that they paid for somewhere out of their own budget. They're able to pay and produce a podcast in cooperation with local news. Your TV Halton host came in to host and do the podcast. And then we also have the story in Toronto where Toronto PD spent, $300,000 plus on a podcast. I'll be honest, for a 12 episode podcast, it does not cost $300,000, folks. I can guarantee you that. But clearly, there's okay, they have enough money to spend this on what's known as propaganda. Well, Hamilton is able to buy $30,000 drones to fly. I'm like, clearly, they're able to do all this stuff. They have, and quite frankly, in across the province, no police service, at least from what I've been able to read, no police service has had their budget cut. We've had the defund the police movements coming through every major municipality in the province. Not one municipality has voted to cut police funding in the province. And I say, well, really?
I seriously question whether one municipality, whether in theory municipalities can cut police budgets. In theory, I seriously question, and I'm willing to be corrected on this by anybody who wants to get in touch and explain the process to me. I seriously question the extent to which municipalities have an actual power to question the budgets requested by police services boards.
Mm-hmm.
I question that because of discussions I've had with counselors over the years. You know, this it's not coming from nowhere, and maybe they were wrong. Maybe they were telling me a story that isn't true. But certainly the again, you know, to take the conservative point of view of how our tax dollars should always be protected and should, you know, we should question every dollar that we spend. That's fair enough. Got no beef with that. We shouldn't spend money we don't need to, and yet police services budgets go through on the nod routinely. The budget is basically set by the police in working with the police services board. That number goes to the municipality, and the municipality says, "All right, then," and that's kind of the way it works in practice. It simply doesn't happen.
The numbers are there.
Yeah,
we haven't seen at least a plateau. Like there's not even like a case of the police saying, "Okay, no, you're staying with the previous year's budget. Make do." As far as I'm aware, every municipality has seen an increase in funding for their police services. It may not be astronomical. It might not be like, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars, but we haven't seen like just everybody saying, no, you make do with what you got last year. You kept us safe last year with that amount. You can do the same this year. That attitude does not exist. Like there's no pushback from municipal council. And it might be the case of them just saying, all right, well, what can I do? But it would be nice to have a municipal councillor come back and say, like, raise a stink, like, no, you do not need an extra $50 million for
and it's
whatever.
You know, we're as usual, we're 10 years probably behind the US, but being 10 years behind the US in terms of the militarization of the police, of the police moving from a peace, you know, basically a peacekeeping force, a force that is a civilian. It's there to work with civilians to make sure that everybody's safe and protected in their homes, and into a kind of quasi-military force that
you know,
increasingly dresses like the military, and increasingly drives around cars and trucks that look very military.
You know what? How about I want to take a break for a moment, just because I think we have to acknowledge our sponsor for the episode. So just take a break for a moment, and we'll be back in 2 seconds. Okay, and we're back. But just to kind of pick up on the note that you were talking about, Will, about, you know, the creep of militarization of our police service. I think ultimately that's what I think we have to worry about, is that it's so easy to fall into that trap, that narrative of our society is crumbling. There's crime rampant on every street corner, and we can't go down any street at night because, you know, the ne'er-do-wells are lurking to take advantage of all of us. And we were talking before we hit record, like this is one of the reasons why we wanted to do this, at least for me, wanted to do this podcast, was local news feeds off this stuff, like that, the local stuff that you bought, that you get dropped off at your doorstep, the free paper so much. This is what feeds it. I mean, there were stories years ago. What got me to cancel my subscription was there's a story of the Halton, basically the Halton SWAT team, the Halton Special Response Force, went in for a raid on a street in my old neighborhood. I'm not going to name it, but it's not known for being a very crime-ridden part of town. But the SWAT came up full gear, stormed. I remember walking by and seeing, like, well, what's going on here? Oh my goodness! So I went to check out the news in the paper, and they reported that the Halton SWAT team implemented a raid at such a location. That was the story. There's no follow-up, it's part of a drug bust, but there's no talk of, like, did they get the right address? Did they get, like, what was seized at this house? Is this part of a wider coordination? It was nothing, but it left the reader with this sense of, oh my God, it's a crime. We're in a crime cess-ridden neighborhood, and we need the SWAT team to patrol the streets every day. And I kind of want to be like, no, that it's not the case. Our streets are very safe, but we don't get proper accounting of what the police do. There's very little scrutiny of how they behave, and it feeds into this narrative of crime is everywhere, and if it's not for the police, we're going to be swamped in drugs and rapists and murderers and thieves and all this stuff. And I'm kind of inclined to say, no, I don't. I'm not buying into this narrative anymore.
Well, and I think any power, any kind of power given to any entity, so I'm not making a point about the police. I'm not making any kind of dig at them particularly, but any power given to any entity that comes without sufficient oversight will be abused. It's just the way
absolutely.
it is. You know, if you give something the ability to set its own budget with very little oversight, it will ask for more money than it needs. Everybody will. Like if you said to someone, set your own salary year after year after year, and you know what, we're just going to give it to you, and we're not going to really question in any significant way what your salary is. I'm pretty sure that those salaries would go up by a healthy amount every single year.
Oh yeah.
And we'd all do it. I mean, and even if we didn't think we were asking for unfair amounts, we would still end up asking for unfair amounts. It's human nature. So what we're talking about here is the proper oversight of a very powerful body that receives a hell of a lot of money to do what they do. And where there have been serious and well, we know that over the years that police have historically abused powers when they've been able to, and that's, you can take any police again. I'm not taking a dig at Hamilton. I'm not taking a dig at anybody. It's just like any police service in the world, when given the ability, has abused the power that was given it. Again, it's human nature. Actually, it's not taking a dig at the police. We're just all humans, and we will act like assholes when given the possibility to do so.
Look at the kind of closing out this episode of this topic. Most recently, we had the royal inquiry into what happened in Nova Scotia, which, if you're not familiar, there was during the pandemic. There was a gentleman went on a shooting rampage in a small town in Nova Scotia, disguised his vehicle as an RCMP cruiser, disguised himself as an RCMP officer, and basically went to a small town, causing havoc and ultimately murdering. I don't know. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I mean, it clearly a tragic case of what happened. Meanwhile, the police are sitting on the sidelines, puzzled as to who's in charge, what do we do, how do we approach this. So the report has finally come out, and one of there are a couple of recommendations. One is stricter gun control. Basically, they're saying if it's not a bolt action rifle, you don't need it in Canada. If you're going hunting, you don't need an AR-15 to go hunting. That's a different episode. But that's one of the main big recommendations. The other one was more subtle of police need to do a better job at what their role, their relationship is with the public. And one of that being said is kind of what the theme we've been saying so far is that they serve us, the people, the taxpayer. It is not a question of they need their job easier. Their job should be hard. Their job should be downright almost impossible in my mind, because they serve us. We, in this country, we have rights and freedoms. These are sacred to us. Every citizen, every resident of this country is granted protection by those rights and freedoms from the government. The police is an arm of the government. Yes, it's a municipal government, but it's still an arm of it. But we say to them, we grant you a lot of leeway, a lot of power to protect us from the bad people. But when we let down our guard to say, okay, you need more power, you need more permissions, you need more freedoms, we have that creep towards this militarization where, yeah, we have, I mean, how long until we have, coming back to the Hamilton drone situation, how long until the police say we could really use that facial recognition software for those crowd control, so we know if there's somebody somebody dangerous in the
Well,
crowd.
if it's not specifically excluded, I mean, they said someone they asked the question, do you use facial recognition? It's like not at the moment. I think was the reply. The
Right.
exact words was not currently or something like that. Well, if it's not ruled out, then at some point it will be used. And facial recognition software, there's obviously huge numbers of privacy concerns with that. I mean, one of the best things about living in Canada, I often sort of compare my sort of previous existence in the UK. One of the best things about living in Canada is that we're not constantly photographed by 1,000 different privacy security cameras every day. In Britain, in particular, you walk down any street, you're probably being filmed by about 100 different bloody cameras. I mean, I'm not even exaggerating there. It's incredible. So the lack of privacy there is off the charts. And with obviously, I would say, no sort of evidence that it's produced a safer society as a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a kind of slippery slope with this stuff that you do need to defend privacy, our right to privacy at every turn, because there's so little of it now anyway. With our phones, we're being tracked on GPSs everywhere we go. The data we're sharing with private companies is insane, and we only ever have their word that they're looking after that. We need to monitor all this stuff as a way to sort of defend our very weak, so it appears, democracy.
Well, the issue of our digital privacy, that's a whole other episode.
Yeah, it's a whole other
Entirely,
thing.
but you're
Yeah.
right. Like it's a blind spot. Like we because here's the thing, like if you're in public, if you're walking through the park and you decide I'm going to take a picture of something I see, so you can take a picture of anything in a public park, and whoever you capture in that frame, it's a public space, you're allowed to film it. And I know the contrarians to what we're saying are going to say, well, it's not just what the police are doing. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, yes, that's true. But it's what the police can do with that information afterwards. If you and I take a picture of us in a public park and we post it to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatnot, okay, it goes up there. It's probably not going to be used in some criminal investigation. At least we hope not. But if the police say, well, we want to review the footage to see who might have been at Trudeau's protest, or we want to who might have been at this McMaster football game, McMaster homecoming game. Like what right do they have to do if no crime was being committed? What right do they have to know somebody's political leanings or somebody's maybe at best a misdemeanor might have been happening? Like there is a fine line, and like we as the people, we deserve to know the devil in the details. And for us to allow police to use this, I'm not saying that they can't use it. I'm not saying ban it entirely, but I am saying they have to earn our consent and our respect to not respect, maybe that as well, but definitely our consent and our understanding and our oversight to say we're going to use this, because at some point they're going to have too much power to use this. Like the one example that was given was, or that kind of caught my eye, was the fact that some flights lasted, in the report they're saying most flights in 2022 and January 2023 lasted a few minutes or a few hours, but one flight went on for almost 9 hours. What was going on for 9 hours that the Hamilton PD can't explain what the drone was doing up there for 9 hours?
And maybe it was completely legitimate. We don't
maybe
know.
So, but we deserve to know.
We don't know. Yeah.
And I would say at the very least, maybe what needs to be done is this footage is able to be uploaded for public scrutiny, so we can see what the police are filming. In this case, so we know. And every time that it's up in the air, we know exactly how long it's up, what it's recording, where it is. And maybe that means that you have to position a police vehicle above a neighborhood with a big sign that says drone in the area, or something, to so that people understand, okay, this is happening now. There has to be not so much just a discrete, oh yeah, it went up, but a clear, like a clear log, public access, not just a freedom of information access, but a website that every time one of these things goes up in the air, we can click on it, we can see it, and maybe even watch real time what's happening.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there could be a whole lot more regulation around how these
Yeah,
things
absolutely.
are used. You can almost sort of leave it at that. And I think as far as I think it's right and proper. I mean, there are people out there tend to be of the more conservative persuasion who seem to think that any questioning of the police is an act of kind of disloyalty and anti-Canadianness or something. I think no, I'm not here calling for the abolition of the police or any of this stuff. Um, Fund the police in terms of its original meaning, as in make sure we're funding the police appropriately for their job. Totally in favor of reviewing funding extensively, and the extent to which police are used for things that they are not actually very well qualified for handling, such as mental health,
Yes.
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've been through that before, but
Oh, absolutely.
but I'm not saying abolish the police. That's a very different thing. This is not I'm not some extremist sort of view. The things we can live in, anarchy. Unfortunately, the world doesn't work that way. But I do think that with great power comes great responsibility, and with great power should come great oversight and questioning of the appropriateness of the funding, the appropriateness of the tools that are used, and that we always maintain that the difference between the police and a military force, that they are not about that they are there to protect the public, not the powerful. And we are far too this kind of hero worship, unquestioning hero worship of emergency services, first responders, everything. I have always been uncomfortable with. No one in any job anywhere gets away without being questioned, without having oversight. You put on a uniform, you're not suddenly a superhuman, even if you're doing a dangerous job. Ultimately, you chose to do that job. You didn't have to. Hero worship, and I see that almost kind of quasi-religious kind of view sometimes expressed towards uniformed services, and encouraged by the uniformed services themselves. I mean, the thin blue line stuff, to an extent, is all about that.
I can kind of justify with firefighters and paramedics, though.
No, yeah, but even with firefighters, it's like it's a job. Yeah, you're going into a dangerous situation. Police go into very dangerous situations. Police get killed at a higher rate than firefighters do, as far as I'm aware. Totally recognize that. Totally recognize that. That doesn't mean that you get a free ride, unquestioned right to do anything, or a kind of blank check for your salary. Sorry, it doesn't. It's the same. I mean, you get this with the military sometimes too.
Right.
And again, it's very powerful organizations, very powerful things who are outside the normal rules of society, who we have. Okay, these great guys in uniform. Blah, blah, blah. Well, I makes me uncomfortable. So I'm not saying they don't do really important stuff. I'm not saying they don't put their lives in danger. I'm not saying any of that.
I would argue, though, I just think for those or agencies or organizations, the highest of scrutiny and the highest of standards, and the utmost reluctance to give anything to them is almost justified in my opinion. Just, I'm not saying we shouldn't, but man, oh man, like just the eagerness that some people have to say, okay, let's give They need money. They need this new gadget. Let's give it to them. And I like this stuff like this drone technology. So why do we need to have this brought in?
Well, ironically, we're actually are a lot more careful with the money. Some would say over careful. We're a lot more careful with the money we spend on Canada's military than we are on Canada's police.
True.
Basically, the police get a blank check, the military don't. So it's like, well, we're willing to throw all this money at controlling Canadians, but not, doing whatever outside of Canada. I'm not arguing one way or the other with that stuff, but I think the same kind of questioning of do we really need to be spending this money should happen with policing as it does with anything else in the world.
And we should I would argue, city councils should be given a veto power over police budget spending, also because it comes out of our tax. There should be a veto to say no. We are not signing off on this item. Just the idea.
I'd really like to speak to some councillors about that situation and the practicalities and realities of how police services budgets are set. Obviously, there are usually councillors on the police services board. It's usually one or two senior members of a council who will be on the police services board. However, the theory is, well, they certainly vote on it. I have serious questions that I would like answered about what would happen if a council voted no on a police services budget.
Well, that's the thing, because we've never had it. And that to me is highly suspicious, that we've never had a council say, no, come back with a cheaper, a reduced budget.
Well, if there's any councillors listening, please get in touch. Tell us about it on the record, off the record, whatever. And we would like to know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, let's call it a day, whatever time it is that you're listening to this podcast. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll be back next week with more 905er. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.